There are basically two ways of hosting an rFactor 2 dedicated server. Using a separate dedicated server that does not require Steam, that you download and set up on a PC, or use the server included with rFactor 2 on Steam. They are technically the same. However, the separate dedicated server is what we'll start with here, and given that rFactor 2 will be adopting a new user interface in the future, we can include use of it but not focus on it, since we don't yet know if use of the server elements on Steam will change. Before setting up a server, port forwarding of the local IP address your server will use is needed. We'll include the list of ports below in the video description, which cover the use of both the separate dedicated server and rFactor 2 on Steam. The port forwarding here is similar to what you might use, for example, for a Minecraft server, so it's pretty standard. So most internet service providers, referred to as ISPs, should support this. We'll use a simple picture to represent an example setup. This is just one way of setting things up, so as said, it's just an example. We have a PC running rFactor 2 and connected to the internet through a router. We'll then add another PC and install the separate dedicated server application. I currently have an ISP branded Huawei 4G router, and while it has a public IP option from the ISP that can be enabled, port forwarding did not seem to work. So I'm currently using another ASUS branded router to support port forwarding. So to get the port forwarding working, we'll add another router and connect the PCs to that router instead. We'll connect the Ethernet cable from the LAN/WAN port on the Huawei router to the internet connection port on the ASUS router. Note the WAN IP of the second router, which is in the range of the LAN IP addresses offered by the first router. The second router will then use another LAN IP address range so as not to cause local IP address conflicts. The first router is then placed in bridge mode, so the second router can access its public IP address and control the port forwarding. It will be obvious to many, but by public IP, I mean the result I get if I, for example, Google search "what's my IP?" And the relevant ports are then forwarded on the second router for the local LAN IP of the PC running the separate dedicated server. And once all has been set up correctly, rFactor 2 multiplayer should be able to access the dedicated server over the internet. So in this example, we're using two routers. For regular internet use, just one router is used. This is just one type of setup. Depending on your internet connection type, you might be able to accomplish this using a single router. If you cannot get the port forwarding working, I suggest contacting your ISP. And in this example, one PC is running the separate dedicated server, and the other PC is joining the server session through rFactor 2 multiplayer. Again, it's just an example. You can technically run both off the same PC at the moment, but as said, rFactor 2 is being updated, so I don't know if that will continue to work in the future. If when configuring the ports, your router admin interface doesn't show you the local IP of the PC on which you plan to run the dedicated server, then in Windows, search using ncpa.cpl and locate the network connection that is the internet connection. Open it and select the details and look for the IPv4 address value. This will be the LAN IP address we'll need to include in the port forwarding setup. Also, to keep the IP address from changing once you've configured it in your router, you might consider assigning it permanently as the IP address of the PC running the server. So maybe take a screenshot of the details screen and place it to the side. Then close the details panel and click Properties. Select the TCP/IPv4 entry, click Properties and change it from automatic to use the following IP address. and manually enter the current IP address the PC is using. The subnet mask should autocomplete, and the default gateway you can take from the details screen, in this example shown in the screenshot on the left. And for the DNS server, if you don't know the DNS server details of your ISP, you can, for example, use Google DNS, which is 8888 and below 8844. Then click OK and close the panels. There are several examples of the separate dedicated server installation instructions. On screen is just one example. I'll include the relevant info below in the video description. Copy the Item 1 download installer link from the video description and paste it into your browser. The zip archive should then be downloaded to your Downloads folder. We'll need to create a directory where we'll install the separate dedicated server. In this example, we'll open another file browser window using the Windows key plus E and open the root of your C drive or whichever drive you happen to have Windows installed on. We'll use the suggested format of creating a folder called Racing. And in that folder, create another folder called Steam CMD. Then drag over the zip archive from the Downloads folder and extract it. You can then delete the zip archive. Copy the Item 2 download command string from the video description and navigate to the Steam CMD directory where we placed the installer. Then highlight the folder location above and type CMD and press enter. And then in the command window that appears, right-click to paste in the download command string we copied from the video description and press enter. We'll then wait while the dedicated server app downloads. Once you see the word success and are back at the command line entry position, you can close this command window. At this point, it might be an idea to drag the Racing folder we created to your File Manager Quick Access list, as you'll need to access it several times. If we compare the dedicated server installation to our Steam install of rFactor 2, we can see how they are similar. Whenever rFactor 2 is updated, the server will also need to be updated, and if we're using the separate dedicated server, we'll need to update it separately. We can quickly create a .bat file to run the update command whenever we want to use the server. Again, copy the Item 2 download command string from the video description, and in the Steam CMD folder we created, right-click and select New Text Document. Then open this new text document and paste in the command we copied. Then on the new line enter the word pause, which will allow the command window to stay open once the download has completed. The pause option is necessary, so remove it if you like. Then save the file, and using the All Files option, save it as a .bat file. If you maybe add an underscore character to the file name, it will stay at the top of the list when we sort the file list by name. We can then delete the temporary text document, and when we wish to update the server, we just run the bat file containing the update command. To create a desktop shortcut to the server app, browse to the Racing rFactor 2 dedicated folder and look for the rFactor 2 dedicated app in the bin64 folder. Right-click and choose Send to Desktop. Locate the shortcut on the desktop, right-click on it and select Properties. and at the end of the target value string, add the plus path string from the item 3 server shortcut link below in the video description. If you've created the installation folders exactly as we did here, you can paste in the complete server shortcut link string of text from the video description. Or if your path is different, just paste in only the plus path value at the end of the string and then click apply to save the changes. And then from the bin32 folder, locate the mod.mgr app and again right click and choose send to desktop. And then from support tools, do the same for the MAS2 app. If you like, you could also right click on the desktop to create a folder to place the shortcuts in. And you could also add a shortcut for the update.bat file we created. This might help to remember to check for updates before running the server. The next concept deals with adding car track and user interface content to the server. There is a way to download content manually to the dedicated server using a command line method, which we will show here. There is also a way to use car and track content that you already have through Steam. This method we'll cover later. Firstly, from the video description, copy the string from the item 4 download content command. As we did earlier when we created the update.bat file, again in the Steam CMD directory, right click to create a new text document. Open the new document and paste in the command, and you can add the pause command again if you'd like to. Notice the two number values at the end of the string. 365960 is the Steam ID of rFactor 2, and the other number represents an item in the rFactor 2 Steam workshop. To find the ID of an item from the rFactor 2 Steam workshop, launch Steam and then go to Settings and then Interface and enable Display Steam URL address. Then, as an example, we can search the rFactor 2 Steam workshop for a track. For example, Lime Rock Park, and then copy the item ID from the URL string above in the workshop item view. Then return to our text document and replace the second number string with the number for Lime Rock Park from the workshop. We'll then need to replace the username and password values with those of our Steam account which owns a copy of rFactor 2. Then we can save the file as a .bat file again, using the Save As All Files method. We'll save it as a download.bat file, which we can then use to download Lime Rock Park. We can then download another circuit and reuse the download.bat file we just created. We'll look for a popular item in the rFactor 2 Steam workshop. Zandvoort will do, so we'll copy the item ID for that circuit. Then right click on the download.bat file and click Edit. Replace the ID for Lime Rock Park with Zandvoort, then save the file and run it. While we wait for the download to complete, we can look for the ID of a car now as well. This Brabham might be good for a server, so we'll copy the ID of this one next. And now that Zandvoort has downloaded, we can close the command window, then edit the bat file again to add the new ID. And again, once that is completed, we can add the ID for another car from the workshop, and in this example the Renault Megane. And again we edit and save the bat file with the new ID. Once the car has downloaded, before closing the window, copy the file path that appears in the command line window. Then close the window and paste the path in your file browser. This path is the location of the downloaded .rfcmp package file. And if we step back up the directory to the 365-960 folder, we'll see a folder name for each item ID we've downloaded. Note that the Brabham contains a Photoshop file as well. We can just remove that if we don't need it for the purposes of running the server. Note that the first time you use the command line download option, you may need to enter a Steam guard code. So if necessary, look for the code, send for example to the email address associated with your Steam account. And also note that if you happen to be running the dedicated server on the same PC as you have Steam installed and are using the account you are currently signed in to Steam with to download the content using the command line method, you may get signed out of Steam and need to add your password again the next time you launch Steam. The downloaded files will then need to be installed on the server. To begin, the simplest thing would be to go to the folder where the downloads are stored, such as Steam CMD, Steam Apps, Workshop, Content, 365-960. And then by using the Windows key plus E option again, open another file browser window and open the packages directory in your dedicated server installation. Or if you have the dedicated server on a separate PC, then copy the package files to a removable storage device or set up a local network share, etc. Then drag each of the .rfcmp package files you downloaded into the packages directory. And to maybe keep things simple, you could also now delete any empty folders. As many will know, the rFactor 2 Steam Workshop also includes the ability to add in-game user interface elements such as custom car showrooms and in-car HUD elements. The use of these elements are optional, but we can include the concept here as part of the dedicated server, since it also supports adding them if you would like to do so, and it may be of use to know what the components section refers to when creating a server package. In this example, I have the rFactor 2 window reduced and windowed so we can show how the in-game elements relate to installed content. If I select the car and click Tuning, it will load the stock rFactor 2 showroom, and over on the right, if we look in the showroom folder in the installed folder for rFactor 2 on Steam, we can see the source files for that showroom, and the user interface and on-screen display elements would reside in the HUD folder, etc. Let's quickly add some UI elements from the Steam Workshop using the command line download method. Here I have 3 items I've used in the past, added as workshop favorites so they're easy to find. We'll right click on the download.bat file and copy the string twice so we can add 3 content IDs to download at the same time. Once we have the IDs pasted in, we save the file and then run it. Then we again go to Steam CMD, Steam Apps, Workshop, Content 365960, where the downloaded items will be in their associated ID folder names. And then, like before, we drag them over to the packages directory of the dedicated server. And remove the empty folders if we don't need them anymore. We'll then need to run the mod.mgr app, for example from the desktop shortcut we added earlier. If the file paths in the lower right corner of the window are correct, all available content, both already installed and packages yet to be installed, should appear above. Note that the application may sometimes default to the bin32 directory, and if it does, then try moving it up one step so that the working directory is the root of the dedicated server application folder, and the packages directory is the packages folder in the same location, the folder we moved the downloaded files into. Note the working directory referred to here is the installed content folder inside the dedicated server installation, where the content is placed once it has been installed from a downloaded package. And the packages directory is of course where we copied the downloaded packages to before we installed them. Then, with the items filtered by installed, press the Ctrl key to select the names of all the packages you copied over, or select the first item, and then pressing Shift, click on the last item to select them all at once and then click Install. And then once you're done, you can close the mod.mgr window. Before we can start a server, we must first create a session to run on it. We can now use the Mast2 app to create a server session using the content we downloaded and installed into the installed directory of the dedicated server. Start the Mast2 app from the shortcut we created earlier. We first click the Set Packages Directory button and make sure the Packages directory is set to the Packages folder inside the dedicated server. We then click the Create Packages File button and begin by giving our server session setup a name. It might be wise to keep the name simple, without any spaces or special characters, just to prevent any compatibility issues when we try and get the server up and running. Check Customize and use the RFM file value to change the pace car that will appear in the session. Click Next and drag your mouse to select the tracks you want. And click Next again, and we'll use Ctrl click to select the first and last car option. And Next again will allow us to select any other components we wish to use. And the reason I included the addition of downloading showroom and HUD elements was for this section, in order to try and get an understanding of its relevance. We can Control select the 3 elements we downloaded together and include those as well and click Done. This is the final stage of creating the mod package to support the server session. Leave all the items on the left unchecked. We will only highlight each one, and on the right side, uncheck any parts of an element we don't want to include, such as additional layouts of a circuit or liveries of a selected car. And then when ready, click the package button, then click install and then click done. And now if we check the rFM folder in the installed directory and the packages directory, we can see the related files we have just created will be used to build the server session. So now that we've used the mask tool to assemble a mod package, we can now use the dedicated server app to create the server session. I believe there is a way to have more than one server instance running at once, but we'll keep things simple for now. And if you manage to get a server running and can connect to it, then maybe look into more advanced options. We begin by selecting the game database to use. At this point we've only created one, so just a single entry. And remember that this selection refers to the files in the packages and rFM folders that we just created. We can enter a password if we need to. This is just a password for the server setup, not to join the server itself. Then click Vehicles. We can add or remove elements of the selected cars, and note the list of liveries for the selected car appear on the right. You can force the driving view if you'd like as well. Just select None if you want those joining to use spectator cameras, etc. as well. And you can specify fixed setups or upgrades as well. Then press Config. Note we began by selecting 2 circuits, although here only one is selected, so we'll add both. And note that you can use the plus and minus on the right to change the arrangements of the tracks. We'll leave the connection type at its defaults and then click Options. And here we have the event options. Those familiar with rFactor 2 will recognize most of these. The race name is the name of the server as it appears in the multiplayer list, and you can add a server password if you like. And of course, anyone looking to join the server will need this password. The rest of the settings on the left side are up to you. Flag rules should be black only, I guess. I mean, if there are any flag related bugs. Fuel and tires can be normal, and mechanical failures can be disabled if it's maybe just a practice or hot lap server. You can then also enable practice or qualifying and race length by laps or time, etc. The driving aids on the right relate to the difficulty settings in rFactor 2. Traction control 1, 2 or 3 refers to low, medium or high. And if you want to just use any available in-car traction control only, then set this to 0 and the same for other similar items. Use the AI toggle if you wish to fill out the server with AI opponents, and set the strength and minimum and maximum number of AI. Then set a weather type, race start and time acceleration options. And when ready, click Load Track. If and when you see the game name appearing correctly, the server should be live. When either first starting the dedicated server or first joining an rFactor 2 multiplayer session, look out for the Windows security alerts and click to allow access. Sometimes these prompts can appear behind an application window, so you might not see them. So just a note to keep an eye out for them and allow them when necessary. We'll now switch to another PC with rFactor 2 from Steam installed, and we'll join the multiplayer server. Select it from the list, click join and enter the password. Notice how the loading dialog shows the user interface components we included being downloaded. We then get a mod could not be installed error. Not to worry. This is, I think, one of the cars not being served correctly. If we go to the settings, we can see that the on-screen display and showroom options have been installed for the user, and to use them each user would have to select and accept them in their own copies of rFactor 2. Also note that getting these components from a server adds them as standard to rFactor 2, so the player would have them available in single player mode as well. When the server is running, we can use the panel to restart the weekend or go to the next race, similar options that are available in-game. And in this example, the next session takes us from Lime Rock Park to Zandvoort. We click Race to join the session. Past the loading screen, and once in the session, wait for the AI, if included, to populate the server. Click Race again and get into the car. And here you can see the UI elements we included are available to the player. Since the cameras are enabled, we can use the spectator cam to check the SLS safety car we selected when we created the mod package. And as you can see here, it doesn't look like it's going to get very far in this session. And then as the server has been moved on to the next race, Zandvoort will load for the player. Given that one element of the server session would not load, let's look at recreating the server mod to see if we can get all elements to load correctly. We'll open the mod MGR app again and select the server session mod package, then uninstall and delete it. And note how it's then removed from the server, packages and install directories. Then we open the MAS2 app again, and if we select Edit Existing Mod, we can see that our selections are still in place based on temporary data in the user's app data folder in Windows. The folder in use will be on the same drive where you have Windows installed. So for example, C users username app data roaming mass temp. And note that both the separate dedicated server and the server included with rFactor 2 on Steam will use this folder, so one will see the files created by the other. And if you ever need to clear out any previously created mod packages, you can empty out this folder. I have pinned it to quick access in the file browser here, which was useful while I was switching between the two server types while testing. We'll then click to permanently remove the stored session data and click Done. Then we proceed to create a new mod package. Give it a name and instead select the IndyCar value for the safety car. We'll only include Lime Rock Park and select the same two cars as before. We'll ignore the component options, since anyone who joined the previous session would already have those components installed. Click Done and proceed to create the package like we did earlier. We'll then start the dedicated server app once more. And this time, as an example, set the Renault Megane selection to the Trophy 2 version. Since our session setup and difficulty options have been recalled from the previous session, we'll leave all as it is and click Load Track to start the session. If we monitor the server session dialog, we can see when someone joins the server and add additional AI, edit the grade list, or boot someone from the server, etc. The player can then refresh the multiplayer server list and join the server again. And this time we don't see the mod failed error, and both the Renault and the Brabham are available. We'll then select the Renault Megane and click Race to enter the car. And if we then use the spectator camera to check the safety car again, we can see that this one looks a lot better. When a player joins a server session from rFactor 2 and will have car track and additional components added, note that similar to the separate dedicated server installation, in the same folders in rFactor 2 on Steam, packages and installed will also get served copies of the related content. While it's technically possible to join a separate dedicated server session from rFactor 2 running on the same PC, it might not be advisable, and the setup is subject to change. When you start a dedicated server session and then start Steam, rFactor 2 may show the game as already running. If so, then look in your rFactor 2 installation directory for the launcher folder, and then run the Launch rFactor application. However, note that once the new rFactor 2 user interface becomes the default, this launcher will, I think, no longer be available. So how this concept will function in the future, or not at all, I'm not sure of right now. And before we move on to look at hosting a server through rFactor 2 on Steam, note that when using the Mod Manager app, for example, after you've been creating mod packages to host server sessions, that you can sort your mods view by components, which are car track and user interface elements, and by mods, which are those packages you've created using the MAS2 app. And you can view the contents of those packages in the panel on the lower right, which is useful if the name of the package does not indicate its contents. It's possible to use car and track content from rFactor 2 on Steam in the separate dedicated server by manually copying over content from the installed directory in your copy of rFactor 2. For the purposes of keeping content up to date and reducing the risk of bugs, I would only copy over the content you actually need. And in this example, we'll copy over some paid DLC content and then show you how to use it. To begin, we have created a server using content downloaded from the Steam Workshop for rFactor 2, which we covered in the previous sections. The point here is that we must first start a dedicated server, at least once, before we can complete the process of using paid DLC through the dedicated server. Above we have the installed directory of the dedicated server, and below the same installed directory from rFactor 2. Into the locations folder we'll copy the Nordschleife and into the vehicles folder the GT3, Ferrari and Bentley. Note that in this example both rFactor 2 on Steam and a separate dedicated server are installed on the same PC, but of course they do not have to be. If we then check the Mod Manager app, with components enabled, we can see that the new content is installed. There are no packages for these items listed, since we only copied over the installed versions, so under File on the lower left it will state No Package File. We'll then use the Mas2 app to create a package using the content we copied over. Note that when adding any car or track, you should always select the latest versions that appear in the list. In this example, there are 2 versions for the Nordschleife and 2 versions of each of the GT3 cars, and in all cases you should choose the one with the higher version number. And if we just want to run the 24-hour layout of the Nordschleife, we can uncheck all other layout options over on the right. If we then launch the Mod Manager app, we can see that the new package has been added. And if we try to create a server session using this package, when we go to select vehicles, the window will be empty, since the paid DLC content has not yet been authenticated. So we exit the server setup, and in both the dedicated server above and rFactor 2 on Steam below, we open the user data folders. And copy the server keys.bin file from the user data folder on the server to the user data folder in rFactor 2. You should then launch Steam and run rFactor 2. Load the single player mode at least once and then exit the game. Then look in the user data folder in rFactor 2 for a server unlock.bin file and copy that file into the user data folder in the dedicated server. Then when you start the server setup again, that includes the DLC content, the vehicles will be available to select, and you should be able to continue with setting up the server session using the paid DLC cars and tracks. Note that depending on the circuit you decide to include in the server and the speed of your host PC, it may take a while for the server session to actually load, so be patient. In this example, we watch the CPU and RAM usage on the PC until the server actually starts. And when using, for example, the Nordschleife or Le Mans, it might take a while to finally load. As we noted earlier, this video is focused on the separate dedicated server option. So if you've used a timestamp to jump to this section, I would suggest you check the previous sections first. While it's possible to create a dedicated server using rFactor 2, the setup is subject to change given the new interface being developed by Studio 397. We'll go through setting up a server session using rFactor 2 on Steam. However, the separate dedicated server option is, I guess, the simpler method to go with for now. Although of course the Steam version would already have content and content updates built in, rather than having to manually download or copy over files, etc. In this example, since Steam is running in the background, we'll shut it down and then open the rFactor 2 installation, and in the bin64 folder, locate the dedicated server app and create a shortcut to it. And similar to what we did with the shortcut to the dedicated server version, we must add the plus path value to the target value of the shortcut. If you need to, grab a copy of the plus path value string from the item 3 server shortcut link below in the video description. And then we add shortcuts to the mod manager app in the bin32 folder, and in support tools do the same for the MAS2 app. And this is the same process we went through when setting up the dedicated server. We don't need to configure a server update option in this case, since Steam will handle that, and it might be an idea to place the shortcuts in a folder. If we run the Mod Manager app, we can see all the components included in our rFactor 2 installation. We'll use the MAS2 app to create a mod package for a server. Remembering to select the latest version of each car and track that we add to the package. In this example, we're going to use Le Mans and uncheck the 2018 version, so we use the 2020 version only. Once the package has been created, if we check the package and installed rFM folders in our rFactor 2 installation, we can see how the related files have been created. While it's technically possible to run the rFactor 2 on Steam dedicated server and join the server using rFactor 2 on the same PC, it's subject to change in the future. If when running this version of the dedicated server, Steam shows rFactor 2 is already running, then look in your rFactor 2 installation directory for the launcher folder and run the launch rFactor application. But as said, this system is subject to change at some point. Once the server is running, we could sign into Steam on another PC and join the server. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing as well.
Hate YouTubers, that's my pro tip.
A comment is always welcome, along with sharing the video with anyone you think might be interested in checking it out. And if you don't mind adding to your notifications, click the bell icon in YouTube to be notified of future videos as well. Until next time, thank you.